Today's daf is Chulin daf nun. And we are 18 lines from the bottom of daf Mem Tes Amid Beis Manyumin Kanduka. Today's daf is being learned as a schus refuah shalema for Chava Miriam Bas Malka Freda and Shloima ben Chayaleh. So we're moving along in Perik Elu Trefus, and we've turned our attention from the trefus of the lungs to the trefus of the stomach of the animal. So we talked a little bit, high level, about the stomach, or shall we say stomachs of the animal. It's going to be a major topic of the next few dafin with some very halacha lemaisa digered. Today's daf is very much a continuation, just based on the daf itself, of some of the previous dafin, in that it's very technical in nature. Stating that, we begin with a little bit of a digression. Minyumin Kanduka. So, the fellow's name was Manyumin, and he was a Kanduka because Rashi says he was a Meicher Kadin. He used to sell jugs. Either way, so he had a kad, he had a barrel that was filled with honey, and he left it uncovered overnight. So, in today's day and age, that wouldn't be such a big deal. It's not even ta'an shelas chacham me ikar adin. But once upon a time, this was a very, very big issue. And the reason is because there's a halacha that says that in the event that somebody has a mashkin and he leaves it megula, he leaves it exposed, uncovered, overnight, he's not allowed to eat from it. And the reason is because there's a concern that maybe a nachash came, deposited some venom inside of it, and as a result, for someone to go now and eat or drink from it would be considered very dangerous. In fact, the laws of Megulin are treated more stringently than the laws of ordinary machalas asurais, based on a Gemara in the beginning of the Masechta, a klal gadol in Shas, and that is chamiras akante meisura. So this, once upon a time, was a very, very big deal. So Minyumin Kanduka, he's some commercial distributor of different kadim, and they're filled with beverages. And this particular kad was filled with honey. He left it exposed overnight, and now he had a shayla. Is he allowed to drink, eat, sell it, or does he have to dispose it? So he went to the great Rava. Amar Rava told him, it's pashut, it's fine. Chada, number one, the Tanan, it's a Mishnah Masechtes Truma. There are three mashkin that are aser in the event that they were left exposed. Meaning there are three mashkin that are included in the halacha of Gilui. Hayayin, wine, v'hamayim, water, v'hechalav. So these are sugyas that deal with chalev. There are no nekudas in most gemaras. And as a result, you have to know, is it chalev or chalav? This is one of the exceptions. It's chalav, but the bottom line is, it says the Mishnah, ushar kol mashkin mutarim. As it relates to all the other mashkin, they are going to be mutar. So Rava said, right out of the gate, this is a Mishnah. Hayayin, hamayim, v'chalav, not vash. As a result, there's no gili v'oid. And then he told him that even though I know that there is a das yachid, and we're going to see it's not just any yachid, it's the great Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, who holds that dvash is included in gilui. However, when it comes to such a halacha, I would not be soymech on that das yachid. And the reason is because we find that the Torah had rachmanis on the money of Klal Yisrael, and being that we're dealing here with a monetary loss, so I don't think we should rely on that yachid. So Menyumin Kanduka comes to Rava, tells him what happened, and Rava tells him, Shtei tshuvas b'davar. There's two reasons why I don't think this is an issue. Number one, Shloisha mashkin asur mishum gilu yayin mayin chalav and not vash. And even if you're going to tell me that there is a das yachid, Reb Shimon, who holds that dvash is included in gilu, and you're going to tell me that you want to be machmir like the das yachid, like the Mesilas Yesharim talks about in Perek Yud Gimel, that one of the oifanim of precious is to be machmir like a das yachid. So you'll tell me you want to be machmir like the das yachid. This is not the place for chumras, because you see that the Torah's feeling and sensitivity when it comes to Mamoinim Shal Yisrael is to have rachmanis. So to be machmir when you're going to end up having this huge hefsid, that's not a thing to do. So this was Rava's psak. Amalei Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak the Rava. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, another one of the great Amoiram of all time, was Laban Rava when Rava issued this psak, and he told him, Reb Shimon v'sakonis nefashis v'at amrit I hear you psak, Rava, but stay chuvis on your psak. Number one, this das yachid is not just an ordinary yachid, it's the great Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. So you're just gonna say, oh, it's just a yachid. And you're gonna add to that, oh, Atayra Chasam Amaynim Shel Yisrael. This is a question of sakonis nefashis. This is a question of chamira sakanta meisura. So in as much as we're sensitive to the money of the yid, but the nefesh of the yid is way more chamor. And as a result, Rab Nachman Bar Yitzchak categorically, fundamentally disagreed with the psak of Rava. Says the Gemara, Reb Shimon, who is this Reb Shimon, the Rab Nachman Bar Yitzchak was referring to? The Tanya, it's mentioned not in a Mishnah, but it's mentioned in a Brisa. There are 5 mashkins that are not included in Gilui. Tzir, that's fish brine, v'chaymitz is vinegar, shemen is oil, dvash is honey, umurya. So that's some sort of liquid that is made with different ingredients, most notably the innards of a fish. The bottom line is, Rav Shimon says in that Brisa, no, they all do have giluv. Rav Shimon added a raya to what he said. I once saw a nachash sitting down. He ordered a glass of tzir. It happened in the city of Tzidon. So I saw with my own eyes that a nachash will eat tzir. Right? Why would you say that the 3 mashkin have giluv, but the other mashkins don't have giluv? It's probably because the Nachash has an appetite for those 3, not so much for the other ones. So Rab Shimon said, I'll prove to you that it makes sense that there should be an Isser Gilui when it comes to Tzir, because with my own 2 eyes, said Rab Shimon, with his holy eyes, see Shabbos Taflam and Gimel, Aniro Isi Nachash Sheshasa Tzir B'Tzidan. Amalai said, the Chacham told Rab Shimon, Shat Yahava. Now that Nachash, we know this Nachash. He used to make his rounds. He was a deranged Nachash. You can't bring a raya from a shaita. It doesn't matter if it's an Adam or a Nachash. And it's for that reason you can't prove anything from there. But the bottom line is, that was from Yitzchak's Taina to Rava. He told him it's not just a Das Yachid, it's Reb Shimon, and this is not a question of Atayru Chasam Amaynim Shel Yisrael. This is a question of Sakonis Nefashos. Amalei, Rava had a response. Rava told him, Oidli Mias Betzir. I think you have to be moida to me that even though Reb Shimon holds that tzir is included in these 5 mashkin that really would have an issa magulim, but I think you have to be moida to me that today if somebody wants to eat or drink tzir that was left overnight, it would be fine. Why? Because the Rav Papa, Rav Yeshua, the Rabbanon, Kihavulu, Giluya, whenever they had a Gilui situation and they didn't want to get rid of the mashkin, what they would do is they would add a little bit of tzir into it, and by adding tzir into it, the assumption was that the tzir was going to take away the eres, this venom that was inside, and it was going to be okay. Now, if tzir takes away the venom that exists in a mashka, then it's pashit that if the nachash would go straight into the tzir, that the tzir would be able to neutralize and be able to knock out any potency that was going to come from the venom. So one thing is for sure, you see that the Chachamim held that as it relates to tzir, we're not going to be machman like Reb Shimon. So if when it comes to tzir, we're not going to be machman like Reb Shimon, so it makes sense regarding the other ones, specifically dvash, which was what they were donning right now, which should also be fine. Yitzchak told him, even if you want to tell me that tzir is a raya from the hanhag of the Rabbanim, that they weren't machmir like Reb Shimon, but at the same time, it's not a gilui on all 5 of Reb Shimon's halachas, maybe 4 of the 5, but not all 5. Which one not? Not dvash. The Reb Shimon ben Elazar Kaikav will say, because you find Reb Shimon ben Elazar also held like Reb Shimon at the time, on Brisa, Reb Shimon ben Elazar used to go like Reb Shimon. So even if you want to tell me that we're not going to be chayish for Reb Shimon when it comes to tzir, and even if you want to tell me that that should be a gili on the others, I would say it's a gili on chaymetz, shemen, and murias. But for it to be a gili on dvash, not, because dvash has a different shulchan aruch based on the fact that it's not only Reb Shimon, it's also Reb Shimon ben Elazar, right? There's enough gemina if one person says something or if 2 people say something. In fact, in the sugas of Yachid v'Rabbim, it could be once 2 people say something, they're already considered a Rabbim. This is right from way back. But the bottom line is, the end of the day, there was this stalemate between Rav and Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak had to deal with Menyumin Kanduka. So again, Menyumin Kanduka had a bastikut, a dufsha, some hard Aramaic words, but he had a kad, a barrel of dvash. It became a gulin. It was exposed overnight. And there was machlokes Rav and Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak what Menyumin Kanduka is supposed to do. Rav had a koyach de'atera. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak felt chamira sakanta me'isur. This is no joke. So over here we have to take this very seriously. Rav held that mi'ikar adin shloisha mashkin asurim mishum gilui hayayin hamayim v'acholov, and not dvash And besides, being that we're dealing with a hefsid moment, HaTorah chasa al mamonim shel Yisrael, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said that although it's true, the Shitas HaChachamim is that only yayin, mayim, and cholav are included in Megulim, but not Dvash. But Shitas Rab Shimon is also Dvash, and Rab Shimon's not even a Das Yochid as it relates to Dvash. V'chein hoy Rab Shimon Elazar ois to Dvash, because it was also Rab Shimon ben Elazar. So it's not so pashut to just invoke the Mishnah of Shloisha Mashkim Asur Misham Gila, because there is another opinion, and it's not only the opinion of a Yachid, it's the opinion of a Yachid plus another Yachid, which might even be a Rabbim. Additionally, Rava, your gisha to this is HaTorah chasa al mamonim shel Yisrael. I'm sorry, I hold this is Sakonis Nefashis, and if there's ever a place to be Machmer, this is exactly the place that you are supposed to be Machmer. Either way, we now return to our regular program, which is dealing with laws related to stomachs. Also, if you recall from the end of yesterday's daf, laws related to the chalavim of the animal, and specifically in the event that there's a nekev inside the stomach, or maybe one of the other avarim of the animal, whether chelev, the fats that are in that area, to the extent that they're plugging that hole, is that plug considered a valid plug, so that the nekev would not render the animal a treifa or not? Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said, chelev ha'asik koiva in a soisam. The chalavim, we know there are many types of chalavim, as we spoke about in yesterday's daf, but the chelev that's asik koiva, that's shaped like a helmet, like a kova, like a hat, it doesn't have the ability to be soisim. So the Gemara says, hey, where exactly is this chelev? So believe it or not, the Amiram weren't so sure, and there were two Messiahs of what Rav Nachman was referring to. Amrillah, there was some that said, chite de karkashta. It was referring to the rectum of the animal, where in the event that there's a nekev, we'll see more about that later in the daf, but in the event that there's a nekev there, the nekev can render it into a treifa. What if there's chelev in that area? Could it be soisam or not? Said Rab Nachman, the chelev near the rectum that's asik koiva would not have the ability to do. Amrillah, some say that it's referring to tarpisha the liba. It's referring to the encasing of the heart. Rashi says that if that's the case, what we mean is the chelev that was next to the heart, which was also next to the reya, next to the lungs. The Gemara says heart, Rashi says liba v'reya. But the point is that in the event that the Lev would have a nekev, or the reya would have a nekev, to the extent that there's a stima because of the chelev ha'asu kikoiva in that area. That's what Rav Nachman was referring to when Rav Nachman said Einoi Soisim. So again, Rav Nachman said chelev ha'asu kikoiva Einoi Soisim, and no one even knew what he was referring to. There were two chelev ha'asu kikoivas that were possibilities. They were able to narrow down all the chalavim to two. Either he was referring to the chelev ha'asu kikoiva that's by the karkashta, or he was referring to the chelev ha'asu kikoiva that was by the leiv, Rashi says, also by the reya. Amar Rava. More halachas related to chelev being soisim attributed to the great Rav Nachman. So Rava said, Shamit mined Rav Nachman tarti. So Rava was a Talmud of Rav Nachman. He was makabel a lot from Rav Nachman. So Rava said, I heard from Nachman two things. I heard from him that when it comes to the chalavim, specifically the chalavim of the keva, which is one of the four stomachs of the animal, one of those chalavim is called the chimtza, and the other one is called the bar chimtza. So I heard that there's a chimtza ubar chimtza. I also heard that he said chad sasam, chad loy sasam. One of them has the ability to be soisim. So if there's a nekev in the keva, and one of them is being soisim, it's going to be okay. But if it's the other one that's me soisim, it's not going to be okay. But the problem is, so Rava said, I remember a lot, but I missed the punchline. I know that you could take all the chalavim of the cave and you could divide them into two groups. Chimtza and bar chimtza. I know that from a halachic perspective, the difference between the chimtza and the bar chimtza in Elu Trefis could not be more far apart, because one is soisim and the other one is not soisim. My problem is, I don't know what's what. So the Gemara says, Rav Huna bar chinin of Rav Huna breder of Nachman Amar. I'll tell you, bar chimtza sosim. The one that's called the bar chimtza, that's soisim. Aber chimtza loy sosim. One that's called the chimtza is not soisim. Amar Rav Tavus. Rav Tavus said, Simonech, a good way to remember which is which. So he had a very geschmack in a manik. He said, Yofa koyach ben mi koyach. This is a halacha and ksubis and all these sugyas. But this is an idea of Yofa koyach ben mi koyach av. And in our sugya, the application is the chimtza is the av and the bar chimtza is the ben, even though the chimtza did not father the bar chimtza, right? But at the same time, just from the terminology that's used, sounds like it's a father and a son. That's your way to remember that the bar chimtza in the tata, he has the ability to be soisim the nekev, where the father does not have the ability to be soisim the nekev. Okay, so we now know that there's the chimtza, the bar chimtza. One is soisim, the other one's not soisim. We even know which is soisim and which is not soisim. We know that the chimtza is not, the bar chimtza is, and there's a good way to remember it. The problem is, which is the chimtza and which is the bar chimtza, right? And we're still trying to figure out what the keva and the chaylev is. But assuming we know what a keva is and we know what a chaylev is, we know what a nekev is, we know what it means to be soisim. Again, we're not farmers, but assuming we know all that, okay, so now we narrowed it down to the chimtza, the bar chimtza. The problem is, I still don't know what's what. So the Gemara Tashma, bring you a raya. The Amar Rav Nachman said, Inu mechal achle. The hidden in Eretz Yisrael, eat it. Ulidam mistam nami lo yisasam. Doesn't make sense that for us it shouldn't even be able to be soisim. So we're going to see now in the next 10 or so lines of Gemara that there was a certain part of the fats of the keva, where there was a big controversy, there was a big tumult. There were two minhagim in Klal Yisrael, whether or not you eat it or you don't eat it. So the Anshe Eretz Yisrael were mekel, they used to eat it, but the Bnei Bavel, they were machmer, and they did not eat it. Now, Rav Nachman said that as it relates to those fats, to the extent that inu mechal achli, if they eat it in Eretz Yisrael, could it be that we did done for us in Bavel, Mistam Namid Loisasim, it wouldn't even be able to be Soisim. Now, the background to this is really yesterday's daf, where the Gemara said that the chaylev that a person's allowed to eat, right? Not all chaylev is the quote-unquote chaylev, but the chaylev that a person's allowed to eat, that chaylev has the ability to be Soisim. The chaylev that you're not allowed to eat doesn't have the ability to be Soisim. So Rav Nachman said that in as much as we, Rav Nachman was from the Bnei Bavel, Chasna the Bnei Nasiya, right? He was the Edom by the Reish Galusa of Bavel. But Rav Nachman said that in as much as we're machmer when it comes to this, but as it relates to the Bnei Eretz Yisrael, they were mekel. And being that the Bnei Eretz Yisrael were mekel, so it can't be that we're going to be machmer so far to the opposite extreme, and we're going to take our chumrah and say that not only are we not going to eat it, but it's not even going to have the ability to be sliced of a nekef. Meaning, we have to be made of and mix us a little bit to the Bnei Eretz Yisrael. We have this chumrah, but we can't take this chumrah to such a degree. The Rishayim much a little bit. Why not? It sounds like the Bnei Bavel Halda was a problem. So if it's a problem, it's a problem. It doesn't sound like this was mutter. You can't be moich on someone that eats it, aber bal nefesh yachmer, right? This sounds like this was something that meikra in the Bnei Bavel held was aser. So if the Bnei Bavel held it was aser. But the bottom line is that Rav Nachman said that it's pashut, it goes without say, that chaylev that we're machmerin, but at the very least, if you want it to be soisim, you're going to be able to be soisim. Now let's get this, it's a little nuance, this Gemara. We're dealing now with chaylev of the keva. We know that Rav Nachman himself said, right? Rava said, Shami Neder Rav Nachman Tarti, that there's a chaylev of the keva that is soisim, there's a chaylev of the keva that's not soisim. Well, we know Rav Nachman just told us that the chaylev that they used to eat in Eretz Yisrael that they didn't eat in Bavel has the ability to be soisim. So we narrowed it down from 2 to 1. We know exactly which chaylev then is the one that's soisim, which is the bar chimtza. So we're trying to figure out hay chimtza with the hay bar chimtza. Sak the Gemara Tashma. I'll give you a tremendous lead, and that is, I know that Rav Nachman holds that the chaylev in the keva that they used to eat in Eretz Yisrael, but not eat in Bavel, had the ability to be soisim. If that's the case, that's obviously the bar chimtza, and it's going to be the other chalavim that will not be able to be soisim. The problem is we're still not there. We're getting closer, but we're still not at the finish line, and the reason is because now we have to figure out which part of the chaylev was this controversial chaylev that in Eretz Yisrael they used to eat and the Bavel did not eat. And the Gemara says, believe it or not, there were two lashonos. The Akashta, says the Gemara. So the background for this is a picture, but if you don't have a picture, the background is that the chaylev of the keva, it goes around the keva, obviously. The keva itself, in the words of Chazal, is in the shape of a keshes, in the shape of an arrow. So, I'm sorry, in the shape of a bow. So, you're going to have the rounded part, right? Think of a rainbow, and then you're going to have the straight part, which is going to be on the bottom of the bow. Says the Gemara, the akashta, as it relates to the chaylev that's on the akashta, miloshin keshes, that's on top of the bow, that's that area that's rounded. Everybody held it was us. They didn't eat it in Bavel, they didn't eat it in Eretz Yisrael. Which chaylik did they have a machlokes, the Bnei Bavel and the Bnei Eretz Yisrael. That was the chaylev that was on the bottom on the straight line. That's the part that's on the Yitra. Ikeda Amri, there were those that said that no, just the opposite. The one that was on the Yitra, which is for sure the more cooler, bigger part. In the Ikeda Amri, everybody held that it was mutter. Kipligi the Akashta, the machlokes was only with regards to the Akashta. It was only with regards to the rounded area. So the bottom line is we know that the Bar Chimtza is the one that's mutter. We can identify the Bar Chimtza as knowing that's that controversial chaylev that they used to eat in Eretz Yisrael, they didn't eat in Bavel. What is the Bar Chimtza? Well, believe it or not, there are actually two Lashonos. According to one Lishna, it's the Ayitra. According to the other Lishna, it is the Akashta. Now Rashi speaks out that it has to be the Rav Nachman held, like the first Lishna. It has to be the Rav Nachman held that the controversial chaylev, which ultimately is going to be the Bar Chimtza, is going to be the Ayitra. How do you know that? Because the second Lishna holds that the Ayitra, according to everybody, is mutter, and it's with regards to the Akashta that is a machlokes. Little tricky. If Rav Nachman holds that the controversial chaylev that they used to eat in Eretz Yisrael but didn't eat in Bavel has the ability to be soisem even in Bavel, well, then it comes out all the chalavim have the ability to be soisem. Because da'yitra kula amaloi pligi deshari, and if it's mutter, then everybody holds that it has the ability to be soisem. And even the one that in Bavel they held was aser, but Rav Nachman said you have to be moida b'mikzas. At the very least, you have to be moida that if you want it to be soisem, Bavel is going to be soisem. It's going to come out then that everything has the ability to be soisem. The problem is Rav Nachman said mefurish that shamet minei the Rav Nachman tarti chimtza ubar chimtza chad sasam v'chad loy sasam. So if you're going to tell me that the machlokes is the akashta, but the yitra kulam pligi deshari, so the chaylev that's on the yitra is going to be mutter because you can even eat it in Bavel, and even the one that's on the akashta that in Bavel you can't eat, but at the same time, moed b'mikzas it's going to be able to be soisem. It has to be Zok Rashi. The Rav Nachman held like the first lishna, and that is the akashta kulam pligi the aser, and that's going to be the chimtza that doesn't have the ability to be soisem, because that's considered chaylev in Bavel and it's considered chaylev in Eretz Yisrael. Ki pligi da yitra, that they used to eat in Eretz Yisrael, they didn't eat it in Bavel. So Rav Nachman, even though they didn't eat it in Bavel, but Hami, if you want it to be soisem, it's going to have the ability to be soisem. So in the world of Rav Nachman, what's the sikum? The world of Rav Nachman is, again, Rava had this Messiah from Rav Nachman, that there are two parts of the chalavim in the cave. Now we know the shape of the cave a little bit, so we can narrow it down to the keshes part and the ayitra part. But the bottom line is he gave names to the faces. Chimtza bar chimtza. He said chad sasam v'chad loy sasam. I don't know what. So first the Gemara clarified that it's the chimtza that's not soisem. It's the bar chimtza that is, because yofa koyach haben mikoyach av. The next question was, what is the chimtza? What is the bar chimtza? And as much as the Gemara brought two lashonos, but making a sikum and shitas Rav Nachman and the sugya, there's only one lishna, and that is the bar chimtza is the ayitra, and even though in Bavel they didn't need it, but at the same time it did have the ability to be soisem. Either way, says the Gemara, Kiha the Amar of Avya Amar of Ami. So we're going back now to the fact that the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael were mekel in the first lishna of the Gemara. Rashi says with the chaylev that was on the ayitra. In Bavel they were machmer, and again in the first lishna, the akashta kulam aloi pligi the asa. Says the Gemara, I'll tell you a ma'isa. Rav Avia said in the neighbor Rav Ami that mekamtzen, that as much as it was okay in Eretz Yisrael, for the Bnei Eretz Yisrael, to go and eat from the chaylev that was on the Yitra, but they would take off a little bit. Rashi says the reason they took off a little bit is because even though those fats were considered mutter, but it used to touch other fats that were not okay. So you don't want that on the surface of the kosher fats. Again, this is an animal where everything is all tzamished, so you don't want that there should be a little bit of machalas asuras attached to it. So there used to be mekamitz, v'chein Amar Rav Yanai, mishum zakin. Rav Yanai said the name of a certain zakin, mekamtzen, that's what he's supposed to. Amar Rav Avi, Rav Avi said, Avkim the Rav Ami. I was one standing in front of Rav Ami. Come to the havu leva achal. This is exactly what they did. By the way, you see, the great Rav Ami was also makel on this. All the Bnei Yisrael used to be makel. Shami the Rav Chanina, Havakoi kamed Rav Chanina. Rav Chanina's gabba was one standing in front of Rav Chanina. Amalei Rav Chanina tells us gabba kmoitz havli de echel. could you please give me a little bit of the fats that's on the Yitra? But first, kmoitz, right, do this. Make sure you take a little bit. Chazi become a chasen. And Rav Chanina saw that his Gabba was getting like a little, you sure the Rebbe really wants this? Right? He was getting a little nervous. On Malay, he says, if I guess in Bavlat, which by the way, that was like derogatory back in the day. But Bavlat, you're a Babylonian. He said, Gumshtei. If that's the case, you have to throw it away. And the Mefarshim speak out that Gumshtei, why Gumshtei? Why you have to throw it out? You can't eat it, give it to me. It's before over here that if the Ben Bava wasn't allowed to eat it, he couldn't even give it to the Rebbe. You know why? Now the Rebbe could have taken it himself. Maybe not. But the Rebbe said, listen, the Gabba, you can't give it to me. If that's the case, Gum Shadei, this is something that you have to get rid of. Either way, moving along. Says the Gemara, Tanya, we learned in a Bryce, in the event that the intestines of an animal have a nekev, which would render it a treifa. But there's certain lechos, there's a certain liquid that is plugging the hole. Kshered Allah it's going to be kosher. So in the world of holes being plugged, sometimes it worked, sometimes it doesn't work. We spoke a lot about this regarding the treifa, regarding the reya, and we had a little bit about it just now regarding the fat and the stomachs. So what about as it relates to the pnei meyayin? So if there's lecha, that's sois misan, it's going to be kosher. It says, well, my lecha, which lecha? Rav Kana said, shirka de meyaya, the nakiv, the nafik agav duchka. So it's referring to a certain liquid that's inside the stomach, that if you take a knife, duchka means duchka de sakina, and you press hard into it, it's going to ooze out. That's like a very strong liquid, and if that plugs the hole, then it's going to be okay. So, Gemiri chavraya de Rab Abba, Rab Abba. The chaverim of Rab Abba were mekabel from Rab Abba. There's going to be a lot of names now. Umanu. Who were the friends of Rab Abba? Rab Zera. It was Rab Zera. Famila, some say it was Chavraya de Rab Zera. It was the friends of Rab Zera, the Makal for Rab Zera, Umanu. Who are the friends of Rab Zera? It's Rab Abba, Brei de Rab Chia Barab. So it was Rab Abba, Brei de Rab Chia Barab. Either way. Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So we're not sure who was Makabel from who. Was Rab Abba Makabel from Rab Zera Makabel from Rab Abba. But the bottom line is, it traced itself back to this halacha, to the great Rabbi Yochanan. What did Rabbi Yochanan say? He said two things. Halacha ki Reb Shimon Gamliel betreifa, v'halacha ki Reb Shimon be'eva. The halacha is Reb Shimon Gamliel when it comes to treifas, and the halacha is like Reb Shimon, as in Reb Shimon ba'yichai, stand Reb Shimon is Reb Shimon ba'yichai, when it comes to Avil. So to my halacha ki Reb Shimon Gamliel betreifa. What did Rabbi Yochanan mean when he said the halacha is like Reb Shimon Gamliel when it comes to treifas? Hadam maron. He meant the halacha that we just mentioned, that in the event that there's a hole inside the intestines, and there's the lecha that's soismasan. Which lecha? The lecha that agav duchke the sakina is going to come oozing. Yeah, that's considered a plug. Okay. Reb Shimon ba'avol mahi. What did he mean when he said the halacha is like Reb Shimon? The time we learned the first 3 days after a person dies. So the context over here is Hilchas Avelis. Specifically, somebody died, and the family started sitting Shiva. There was a member of the family that was not present at the time that the family member died, and he shows up during the Shiva. So does he have to start counting his own Shiva? Or if he shows up on day 3, so he can pick up where everybody's holding? Is he nigrar and nimshach v'nitbal to the fact that the family is sitting Shiva right now, or does he do his own thing? So that's what's being discussed over there in this brisa. Kol shlosh yom marishayim, the first 3 days of the Avelos, bami makom karev, in the event that a person shows up and he came from close by, he counts with them. If, however, he came from a faraway place, even if it's during the first 3 days, he counts his own thing. After day 3, even if he comes from a close place, he would do his own thing. Shimon says, even if it's the 7th day, as long as he's bami makom karev, if he comes from a close place, he's going to count with them. So Reb Shimon has this huge kula. Reb Shimon holds that if the family member came from a makom karev, even if he showed up on the last day of the shiva, he literally came in, amakim yanachim, he got up, walked around the block, and he goes home. Even if he did that, then in of itself is going to be okay. Bottom line is, says the Gemara, that either Rab Abba was Makal for Rab Zera was Makal for Rab Abba, and by the way, it's not Stam Rab Abba, it's Rab Abba Brei de Rab Chia Bar Abba, tracing itself back to the great Rab Yochanan, Allah Rab Shimon Gamliel B'Treifa, that's our sugya, and also Allah Rab Shimon Be'evel. What's Allah Rab Shimon when it comes to Avelis? This halacha, this obscure halacha, that if a family member comes with Makom Karev, even on the 7th day, he could be Moine Imam. Either way, says the Gemara, Amar Mandahu, somebody said, who? We don't know. Now the Gemara is all about Sifsoisav Davivois Bekever, and we mentioned all the names. Just look at this last Gemara. Was it Rab Abba from Rab Zera for Rab Abba? Is it regular Rab Abba? Is Rab Abba Rab Chia Bar Abba Hachiyam, the great Rab Yochanan, right? There's 1,000 names on this plot alone. But the bottom line is that we didn't know who it was. So Amar Mandu, this is plainly Almighty. Amar Mandu, Eski ve'esek. One day I should be Zoicha. And I should go to Eretz Yisrael. You see the way the Anshe Bavel used to think of Eretz Yisrael. The next time I go to Eretz Yisrael, Eski ve'esek. When I'll be Zoicha the next time to go to Eretz Yisrael. I'm going to try to meet Rab Abba, who is the son of Rab Chia bar Abba, and I want to hear what he has to say regarding the sugya. Meaning, for whatever reason, he wasn't taking the Amiram at their word. So he said, I want to hear it directly from the Amirah's mouth. So Eski ve'esek, and when I go to Eretz Yisrael, right, everyone has their itinerary. Where are you going? I want to meet Rab Abba, Breit Rab Chia bar Abba, because I want to find out about Halacha Rab Shimon Gamliel, Halacha Rab Shimon. So the Gemara says, Kisolik, this Talmud was Zoicha, his tefillah was answered, and Ashkechei the Rab Abba, Breit Rab Chia bar Abba, and he has this incredible encounter, something he had been waiting for, and he meets Rab Abba, the son of Rab Chia bar Abba. Amalei, so he told him, Amamar Halacha Rab Shimon Gamliel B'Treifa, and he's waiting for him to say, yeah. Amalei told him, Ein Halacha Amri. Very anticlimactic. He says, no. I said the halacha is not like him. And he's thinking, it's a good thing I came. He said, Rab Shimon ba'avel? Is the halacha like Rab Shimon ba'avel? Right, my what there? Amalei, he told him, that plukten in that's all for plunter the Indian. The itma Rav Chizdam halacha, v'chenem Rab Yochanan halacha, Rav Nachman amar ein halacha. He said, I didn't realize the whole sleeve, heard a whole rate bite. He thought he was going to say, yes, no, weiter. He gave him a ganze maisa. Says the Gemara, bottom line. Okay, so, we thought the halacha is Rab Shimon Gamliel b'treifa, and the halacha is Rab Shimon ba'avel. But this Ploini Almoini had the schus to be megala to us that, when he met Rab Abba, Breit Rab Chia bar Abba, turns out it wasn't so pashut. Okay, so now we need to recalibrate. And tachlis, so what is the halacha? So the Gemara tells us, in halacha Rab Shimon Gamliel b'treifa. After all that, we said like 11 times the halacha is Rab Shimon Gamliel b'treifa. The halacha is really not like Rab Shimon Gamliel b'treifa. Like the Ploini Almaini heard it, the halacha Rab Shimon be'evel. The halacha is like Rab Shimon be'evel. You want to know why? Even though we don't usually paskin like Rab Shimon. But the Amar Shmuel halacha kedivrei hamekel be'evel. The halacha is like the divrei hamekel be'evel. We have a rate bite on this from the last machzer. Ayin Sham Zok the Gemara. Amar Rav Simi bar Chia makifin b'vnei meyai. So this term makifin comes up a lot in Eilu Treifus. So what does makifin mean? We had makifin just the other day regarding the reya. There's a hole in the lung, and the sheikhet, the baidik, is trying to figure out if this hole was there from way back, or maybe when the butchers, the sheikhet was playing around with it, he accidentally punctured it. What's the nafkamina? Well, there's a lot at stake, right? Pun intended. If this is an old hole, well, the animal's going to be a treifa. And if it is something that happened after the fact, well, then it's not going to be a treifa. So there's an idea that what you're allowed to do is you're allowed to be makif. To be makif means literally to bring close, right? There's an idea that a Talmud Chacham, when he's mafresh trumas or maisers, he only does them in amukaf. He only does it from something that's close by. But right, think hakafis, you're surrounding it, you're in the area, right? That's the general shayrish. But the bottom line is, what it means practically is it means you're allowed to compare. So you're allowed to take an reya, put a hole in it right now, which is fine, right? It's neither here nor there, you're not doing anything wrong. And now compare the two holes. If the holes look alike, then it's yitachin that this hole also came lachar ha'maisa. If, however, they don't look alike, well, then it's actually more mustaber that the hole is an old hole, and as a result, it would be considered a treifa. So Rav Simi bar Chia said that just like there's an idea makifim bereya, like we had earlier in the parak, makifim b'bnei me'ayin. When it comes to the bnei me'ayin, it comes to the intestines. If you see a hole and a neck of the bnei me'ayin would make it a treifa, but only if it was there all along, not if it was punctured while the butchers were dealing with it. So the same trick of being makifin, this is something that you're allowed to do. So there was an intestines that walked into Rava. So Rava knew the trick. So he brought another bnei me'ayin, right? So the Rav back in the day had to have this in his toolkit. So he pulls out a bnei me'ayin and he punctures a hole. It didn't look the same. He says, I'm sorry, but based on this, it looks like you have a treif. So the Gemara says, Ramesharshi, who was Rava's son, walked in. And he looked and he saw what was happening and he saw the sheikh was very disappointed. So he says, give it to me. Memashmish, but he started playing with it, he's holding it, he's rubbing it, right? Sirchis, and he's doing all these things. The idmu, and then all of a sudden the two holes looked alike. Amalei, so Rava looked at his son and he says, wow, it was brilliant. He said, Minalacha. He says, like, how do you know to do that? Amalei, so Ramasharshi told him, he says, what do you mean? I made a very simple cheshbon. I said, Kama yadi memashmish ubahani mekama delesa lekama demar. I was thinking in my head that this animal, right? This B'nai Me'ayin. Can you imagine how many people touched it? Right? Before it came to Rava, first of all, the shaykhtim were playing with him, but besides, this first probably took it to his medrash, and he asked his chavrusa, what do you think? And then he asked the Rosh Chabura, and then he asked, the Rosh Shiva. He started walking around asking until finally they decided, we're going to go to Rava, we're going to ask the Marad Asra, we're going to ask the Gadol Adar, we're going to hear what he has to say. But can you imagine how many people touched it? So I had this hunch that the reason the two holes don't look the same is because this is a brand new minted hole, and this one has already been through the war. So as a result, I figured that they probably don't look alike. So that was my chap. Let me go ahead and be memashmish with it. Let me mimic what happened to the other one. Let's see if they look the same then. And they looked. Amalei. When Rava saw this, he was so happy. He said, Chakim bri betrefis. Rabbi Yochanan says, wow, my son, he's so brilliant. He's literally like the great Rabbi Yochanan when it comes to trefis. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lazar, asked me for Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar both said, Makif and Brei. By the way, do you have to say Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar the Amri Travayu? Could be not, because that's the Gemara in Yavamis, where the Gemara says that when Rabbi Lazar with Darshan, everybody knew that whatever was coming out of his mouth was literally Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara's mashal was similar to Yeshua ben Nun, that everybody knew. Yeshua ben Nun, you say, Kacham Moshe, of course not. Everyone knew, Hakol Yoiden, that whatever he said was Moshe. We have a rabbi from Margolis. One of his mechkarim is how Stam Rabbi Lazar is always Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lazar, Dami Travayu is almost superfluous, because it's Pashit. If Rabbi Lazar would say it, you would know it's Rabbi Yochanan, and it's Memela Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar, Dami Travayu, a little bit of a But either way, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lazar. My point is, Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish Dami Travayu. That we always say is newsworthy. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lazar, Dami Travayu, of course. But either way, what did they both say? We're getting excited. Makif and Bereya. That is also a concept of Makif and Bereya. So again, when we started Makif and Bereya, we started to Makif and Bereya because we already learned 3 blot of Reya. We went through raid bites already of Glat Kosher raid bites, right? We went through the raid bites of Sirchis. But now we're learning the Sugi of Bereya, so we're starting to Reya. So again, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lazar both said that there's a concept of Makif and Bereya. Rabbi said, the only time this is true, that's only true if the two parts of the Reya that you want to compare, the two holes are on the same aruga. So what's the aruga? An aruga usually is a patch that you have in a field. But what's the aruga? So we mentioned that there was the right side of the Reya, the left side. The lobes on the right, the lobes on the right. Nafkamina, you have to have 3 to the right when the animal is hanging from its hind legs facing the shaykhid, right? But there's a lot of nuance when it comes to how the perfect Reya needs to look. Because if it's imperfect, there might be a treifa. So if you're comparing 2 holes on the same side of the Reya, so now you're comparing Reyas to Reyas, and then it's going to be okay. But if it's going to be on the other side, the rechte zat from the Reya and the linke zat is not something you can compare. Says the Gemara, is that true lahalacha? Yeah. The hilchasa, actually no. Afilu me'aruga laharuga. The halacha is that no, you can compare. You can be makav afilu me'aruga laharuga, midaka ledaka megasa legasa, but only if it's a small lobe to a small lobe, and from a big lobe to a big lobe. Again, this also we saw there's the bigger ones, the smaller ones, the one that looks like the rose, all the different unois and umois. So as long as it's big to big and small to small, even if it's not me'aruga l'aruga, it's going to be okay. That just like you be makiv when it comes to the Bnei, you can be makiv when it comes to the Reya, you could also be makiv when it comes to the gun. And by the way, Abaye v'Rav Damri Travayu is not Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Lazar Damri Travayu. That's also newsworthy because usually if Abaye says right, Rava says left, right? So Abaye v'Rav Damri Travayu, when it comes to the gun, you could be makif. Amar Papa Sleimar, that's only true. That's only true if it's on the same chulya, right? The same cartilage. So what's the halacha? No, even from cartilage to cartilage. Bar chulya. So no relation to the bar chimtza, but also from the bar chulya to the bar chulya. Avalei mi chulya le bar chulya, avalei mi bar chulya le chulya. So what's a chulya and what's a bar chulya? So Rashi says that if you look at the picture of the cartilage, so on one side it's very bright, on one side it's very, very big. On the other side of the kana, it comes to like a point, and literally a point, like a very, very fine point. So the part that's much wider, that's considered the chulya. The side of the kana where they meet at this point, that area that's very, very narrow, that's considered the bar chulya. So again, afilu michulya lechulya umi bar chulya lebar chulya, avaloi michulya lebar chulya, avaloi mi bar chulya lechulya. Repeat that 10 times. Dr. Imam Zairi said, chalchoiles shenikfa. The chalchoiles of the animal. So the chalchoiles is the rectum of the animal that has a nekev inside of it. Kshera is going to be kosher. Why? It's because they're supported by the yurechaim, the hips of the animal, the thighs of the animal, and as a result, being that they're being supported, it's not going to cause the animal to break down. It could survive the fact that it has a nekev. Says the Gemara v'kama, meaning it's the reason that the nekev in the chalchoiles doesn't render it a treifa is because it has the support of the yerech. So you would think it has to be in the area of the yerech. Additionally, the Gemara wants to know how big could this nekev be for it to still be kosher, right? What? It could be as big as you want. A nekev is kosher. Maybe a nekev of mashu. What's the shir? Am Rabbi Eloi, Am Rabbi Yochanan, Makam hadavik. If the hole is literally in the area where the rectum meets the thighs, berubai, then the halach is the shear would be roif. That's when you're running into issues. Shaloi b'makam adavik. If it's shaloi b'makam adavik, then b'mashu, as long as it's a mashu, then already it's going to be a treif. Rabbanan kamei the Rava, mishmei the Rav Nachman. The Rabbanan told the Rava this psak halach in the name of Rav Nachman. Amar. So Rava told him, Lava mina lechu. Haven't I told you in the past, like tisli be buki sriki, that don't attribute empty barrels to my great Rebbe Rab Nachman, because Hachim Rav Nachman never said this. I'll tell you what he said. Makam adavik. If the hole is in the makam adavik, afilu nitol kulay kosher. Even if the entire thing is removed, it's going to be kosher. Meaning, you're telling me if roiv, it's a problem? No, the whole thing can be gone. As long as a ktei tfisa, there's a little something there, that in of itself is going to be okay. V'kama, what's a ktei tfisa? Amar Abaya said, kimloi badita. Rashi says that's the width of a finger. B'toira. Torah is not part of the shear. But Torah means even if it's in a shar, which is very, very big, as long as you have that k'dei tfisa, that in and of itself is going to be, Zok the Gemara. Going back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, Akeres hapnimi, shenikfa. A keres hapnimi that has a nekev inside of it, even if it's a tiny little nekev, that is going to make it into a treif. And that's in contrast to the rest of the keres, where the halach is that if you have a tiny little nekev, it's not going to be a problem. So one of the 4 stomachs of the animal is the keres. Again, a lot more about the stomachs coming up in the next few dafim. So we'll really get into this from a technical and from a halachic perspective. But for now, just to learn another Gemara that is difficult from a hamchasha perspective. When we talk about the keres, the Mishnah divides the keres into the keres hapnimi and the rest of the keres. L'may nafkamina, keres hapnimi, a nekev, even a mashu, is going to make it into a treifa. The question is, what is the keres hapnimi? And as we're about to see, no one really knew. There was so much confusion amongst the Gedolei Amayram, even the Tanam, and we'll see so many different shittas. Rab Yidam Rab, read this in the name of Rab. Hey, Nasim Bar Shila, Reish Tabachai de Tzipori. So Nasim Bar Shila, who was the head butcher in Tzipori, right? So who do we know was a head butcher? Paitifar, right? Paitifar was the Sara Tabach. Machlokes Rashi and the Ramban from the Chumash here, whether he was the head of the butchers or he was the head of the butchers, the executioner. But either way, Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rab, listen to all these names, that Nasim Bar Shela, who's the Sara Tabachim of Tzipori, said Eidos Lefnei Rabbi Mishum Rab Nasim. He carries hapnimi. What's the keres hapnimi? Sanya divi. It's the part of the keres that even the divi, even the wolves don't like. So when a wolf tears apart an animal and he comes to this part of the keres, he's like, I'll pass, right? Keres hapnimi, that's that area. V'chein Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, Sanya divi. Rabbi Shmuel said, no, it's something else. It's stumka de karsa. So stumka, Rashi says, is a stomach balaz. So obviously pun intended, but the word stomach clearly has its origins, at the very least, in Old French. So stumka de karsa. Now, what part of the stomach is this stumka de karsa? Zok Rashi, the Iniyademau. I don't know. So Kidur, Rashi has a lot of Eni Adeyas in Shas that Reb Kivegen Gillian Ashas brings in the end of the third parak of Masechtas Brachas. But the bottom line is, Rashi said, Eni Adeya, I don't know what exactly this is stomach. So it's funny. We know what everything is except what the stomach is. This is the stomach. What's the stomach? The stomach is Eni Adeya. Rav Asi and Rabbi Yechanan, Rav Asi and the name Rabbi Yechanan, Makam Tsar Yesh Mekeres. There is a very narrow part of the keres. Rav Asi said in the name of the great Rabbi Yechanan. So Rashi, who said Eni Adeya, what is stumka the keres is? So Rashi is explaining something that the Tana Rabbi Shmuel said, that the Tana Rabbi Shmuel knew. I was just saying, I just don't know how to be mefarish it. Rav Asi and Rabbi Yechanan said that we ourselves don't even know what it is. We know it's a makom tsar bekeres, but what it is, I don't know. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, "Nothing crazy to bira." Well, you basically didn't give us anything, because if you tell me that there's a makom tsar bekeres, but you don't know what it is, so it could be anything. And if that's the case, anytime you find a nekev in the keres, you'd have to be chayish, then maybe that's what it is. So essentially, we're being forced to take the keres and throw it into the pit. Any little hole is going to force us to discard it. Rav Acha bar Rav Ava, Rav Asi, so stating that Rav Acha bar Rav Ava said, in the name of Rav Asi, min ha-meitzar ulamata, I'll be mefarish, I know what that makom tsar is. Meaning, Rav Asi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Eni Adeya Ezo. But Rav Acha bar Rav Ava said in the name of Rav Asi that no, we do know what it is. And what it is min ha-meitzar ulamata, so it's where the keres starts becoming narrow. Now, where would it become narrow? As it gets closer to the esophagus. And you think of a stomach, right? You think of it being big. But as it gets closer to the vesha, to the esophagus, it starts narrowing. Now, why is it called min ha-keres ulamata? The reason is because the animal is always suspended from its hind legs. So even though when you go from the stomach to the esophagus, you're traveling up, right? But if you're hanging from your feet, well then the acid reflux is not going up, it's going down. Now it's in the other direction. So that's why we refer to it as min ha-meitzar ulamata. Yaakov bar Nachmani or Nachmani said in the name of Shmuel, Makom she'ein by melas. You want to know what the keres hapnimi is? It's the part of the keres that has no wool on its linings. So what does this mean? We saw this already earlier, that there's a part of the keres that has hair, which gives it like a woolly feeling. So the part that doesn't have the melas yet, right? The esophagus doesn't have any hair, and then you get closer to the keres. So there's a part of the keres that still doesn't have this melas, and then it becomes very hairy. So when you're in the keres and the chelik that doesn't have the hair, that's when you're by the keres hapnimi. Rabbi Avina said, Geniva, in the name of Geniva, Mishmei the Rav, it traces itself back to Rav, Tefach beveshet samoch lekeres ui keres hapnimi. So you want to know what the keres hapnimi is? It's the last tefach of the veshet. So it's really, to us, looks like part of the veshet, but that last tefach, that's Ami b'Marav and Eretz Yisrael. They said Mishmei Rabbi Yisrael b'Chanin, every Yisrael b'Chanin, kol keres kulei zui keres hapnim is. That really the entire keres into keres hapnim is. They said, keres hachitza. Okay, so then the question begs itself in the reverse. What's the keres hachitza? Basar hachifes reva keres. So there's like one slab of basar that covers the entire keres. That outer lining is the keres hachitza, but everything else, the whole inside, the whole kishkes of the keres is the keres hapnimi. Rabbi bar Afuna said mafrata. You want to know what the keres hapnimi is? Mafrata, says the Gemara, the obvious question, we're all asking this question. My mafrata, Rabbi said, it means that when the butchers open up the stomach, so there's a part of the stomach that you can see, that you get a visual on. That area is considered the mafrat. The bottom line is, we have a lot of pshatim here, right? If you take it from the top. So it's the sanya divi, it's the part of the keres that even the wolves don't like. Then it's the stumka de karza, stomach balaz, which Rashi says, Eni Adeya. Mokum tsar yesh bekeres. Shaila, whether we know what it is, or we don't know what it is. On the tzad that we know what it is, it's min ha-meitzar ulamata. The fourth pshat that we had was, it's the area that has no wool, right? Doesn't have the hair on the sides. Malcham shein by melas. The next pshat that we had was, it's the veshet that's samuch lekeres. So it's actually part of the veshet technically, but that last tefach that's right next to the keres. And then finally, we had a sixth pshat, well, actually not up to finally yet, but we had a sixth pshat, and that is that the entire stomach is really the keres hapnim. It's just that outer part that's the keres hachitzayna, and the seventh pshat is it's the mifrata. What's the mifrata? That's the area that you're able to see. So if you do the math, it's 7 pshatim, a lot of names, but 7 pshatim, and some of them attributed to Rav and Shul and Rabbi Yechanan. Mamish, the greatest Amiram of all time. Says the Gemara. What was Lamais? Ben Ardai, Abdi Rabbi bar Afuna. In Ardai, they used to follow Rabbi bar Afuna, which was mifrata. That was the main organic. So if the nekef b'mashu was in the mefrata, they paskin that it's going to be a treifa, but anywhere else, it's not going to be a treifa. Rav Ashi la meimar. So Rav Ashi turned to Meimar, and he told him, I don't understand the minig in the hardah. Kol ani shmaitzamai. You have 7 pshatim. Mechatesi, you could go ahead and be machriya like one. Amalei, and he told him, kulam shayachim b'de Rabbi Bar Avuna. I hold that Rabbi Avuna's pshat is actually inclusive of all of them, because when you cut open the animal and you're able to see the area that would be considered the keres hapnimi l'chol hadayis. So really, I'm being machmir like all the shitas. When I say mefrat, it's not because I'm being machriya, it's because I hope that's one shita that includes in it all the shitas. But the Gemara says, how could you say that? One of the shitas were, we don't even know what it is. Right? If I say in the name of Rabbi Yechon, it's a makam tsar, we don't know what it is. So if you don't know what it is, you can't tell me you know for sure you're seeing it. Don't for a picture of Achabarava. It's sure Rav Asiyam Rabbi Yochanan didn't know what it is. But Rav Acha bar Rav said in the name of Rav Asi that we do know what it is. It's the area which starts becoming narrow, and that's included in the Mafrata. Rav Ashi asked him another kasha. He said, Uda Rav Avina, Uda B'nei Maravamai. What about Ravina? Rav Avina said that it's the Veshet at Samach Lekeres. Now, it wasn't really Rav Avina. It was Ravina in the name of Geniva, in the name of Rav. But the bottom line is, he said it's the Veshet at Samach Lekeres. That Veshet at Samach Lekeres, apparently, again, we're not farmers or butchers, but apparently you can't see that. So if you can't see that, what are you going to do about that? And not just that, what about the Bnei Marava? Hey, Marava said, it's the entire keres. It's just that outer area that's a problem. So, Bishlam, you want to tell me when you cut open the animal, you see the area that the wolves don't like, Beseder. The Istumka, the keres, which Rashi said, I don't know, but they knew what it was. That, I hear what you're going to tell me. Mokum, Sar Yesh Bekeres, you don't see. I mean, that also, Minametzer, Ulamata, that also something you're able to see. In terms of Mokum Shem by Melas, that area you're able to see. But the veshet that samach lekeres that you can't see, and if it's the entire inside of the animal that you also can't see. So by you going ahead and saying mefrata, you're actually not being yoitza all the days. You could be yoitza 4 of them or 5 of them, including yours. But there's 2 of them that you're not being yoitza. So what about that? Amalei Samema told him, I hear havadei pligi. You have to say they held not like that. Meaning you're not muchach to say that the naharda were machriya in 7 different shittas. They were machriya not like 2. They were machriya not like Rabbi Avina in the name of Geniva, in the name of Rav, and they also didn't go like the Minig Eretz Yisrael. But in terms of the other shittas, lav dafka they were machriya. It could be they were able to narrow it down from 7 to 5, and they knew one of those 5 includes everything else, and that's why they paskin. So lav dafka they were being machriya from the 7 could be they just knocked out 2, and once they knocked out 2, then already they had a way to go about this. Exhale. Now, just a little announcement. As it relates to raid on this last Gemara that we learned, there's actually a very interesting Maramakim. It's an anonymous note that is on the side of the Torah in the Siman that discusses these halachas. Last Machzer, we did a raid bite on it. The name of the raid bite is the anonymous note on the side of the Torah. So either way, Ayin Sham, that's from Daf Nun Masechtas Chulin, 13th cycle. But as it relates to raid for today, just to say over one ha'ara that connects to raid that we've spoken about a lot. And that is, so we're learning the sugis of treifas. And the Iker parsha of Treifa is one pasuk in the Torah, even though there's different Muslim to it, but there's one parsha mefureshes in the Torah. It's one pasuk. It's in Parshas Mishpatim. The pasuk says, "Va'anshe kodesh tiyunli ubasar basada Treifa loisaychelu lakelev tashlicha noisa." The Chassam Sofer in 2 tshuvas in Yeridei Siman Shin Yud Tes and a Choshen Mishpat Siman Chav Beis asks a bomba kasha. He asks, why is it that if a person has a treifa, la kelev tashlicha noisa? Now we know Chazal, the Mechilta, that the reason the kelev was zoicha to get the treifa is because the kelev didn't bark when the Yidden left Mitzrayim. Because of the respect that the dog showed the Yidden b'shas Yetzias Mitzrayim, it was zoicha to la kelev tashlicha noisa. But that's Pashut, Dr. Chassam Sofer. The only reason the Torah is mandating to take the food and give it to the dog is because there's no way for you to eat it. There's no eitzah. And because there's no eitzah, so it's for that reason, it's pashut that just by process of elimination, you have to do something with it. You'll have enough from it. You can't eat it, so what should you do? Like kelev tashlichan oisai. Why the kelev? Maybe give it the tiger. Oh, the reason is because the kelev didn't bark, and it's for that reason that the kelev was zoich in this. But again, it's pashut that like kelev tashlichan oisai is like a last resort option. It's because you can't eat it, so therefore you need to do something like kelev tashlichan oisai. But I have an eitzah. You know what the eitzah is? Why don't you take the treifa and be mevatel it with meat? Close your eyes and take a whole bunch of meats, throw a treifa into the mix it up so you don't know what's what. You're going to have a taruvas of this of a heter. We know that Allah is achri rabim lahat. It'll be batal b'rayv. It'll be batal b'rayv. Like this, you'll be able to eat it. Says the Chassam Sofer, I know what you're going to tell me. You're going to tell me, Ein mevatl nisel l'chatchila. That's halacha revacha b'Yisrael. We're going to get to those halachas soon. Ein mevatl nisel l'chatchila. But Dr. Chassam Sofer, everybody knows that the shita of almost every single rishon, with the exception of the Ravid, is that Ein mevatl nisel l'chatchila is a nised rabbanon. It's not a nised dayraisa, which means that midayraisa, there's a halacha of roiv, achri rabban lahatais, which teaches me a whole bunch of types of roivs. Included in that is bittul b'roiv. Mevatl nisel l'chatchila. So why does the Yid have to take his treifa and discard it like kelev tashlichan oisai? L'chayres avol gevein amoyer de ge'etzna. The eitzna would have been be mevatel it b'roiv, and being that ein mevatel isel l'chatchila is only an ised rabbanon, midayraisa I'm allowed to do it. So at least midayraisa, why should it be like kelev tashlichan oisai? So if the rabbanon want to come along years later and say, nah, ein mevatel isel l'chatchila, kelev tashlichan oisai, I have no issue with that, and invoke the mechilta. But why would the Torah say like kelev tashlichan oisai? It's predicated on the fact that there is no workaround. There is a workaround. The workaround is why not be mevatel b'roiv? And the Chassam Sofer, to answer this kasha, said a davar chadash. He said that I think you see from this pasuk in the Torah, learning halacha from a pasuk in the Torah, and that is that although it's a machlokes rishonim, where the aim of atlon isel chatchila is an ised deraisa, ised rabbanon, and according to all the rishonim with the exception of the Ravid, all it is an ised rabbanon. That's only when you're dealing with a taruvis of lach belach. But when you're dealing with a taruvis of yavish beyavish, that's more chamer. And there everybody agrees aim of atlon isel chatchila is a deraisa. What's the difference? The difference is when you have a taruvis of lach belach, the physical nature, the chemistry of the davar asa changes. It becomes nes'arev with the davar mutter. It becomes bottled to the davar mutter. When you have a taruvas of yavish beyavish, there's nothing changing, nothing is being altered to the physical and to the chemical nature of the davar asa. You just don't know what's asa and what's mutter. And there's halacha of achirabim lahatois, which is matter taruvas yavish beyavish, just like it's matter taruvas lach balach. But at the end of the day, from a Cheftza of Machalas Asuras perspective, you have it be'en, sagt the Chassam Sofer, in a Taruvas Yavish B'Yavish. You don't have it be'en when it comes to a Taruvas of Lach Balach. So the Chassam Sofer said, Yesh Shloimar. Although it's true, Ein mevatlin isel l'chatchila is only an ised rabbanon. But that's only when the isser is not going to be be'en after you mevatel it. But when the isser is going to remain be'en, it's going to remain intact after you mevatel it. Over there, everybody holds ein mevatlin isel l'chatchila is an ised deraisa. And you know what the Mekayr is? The Mekayr is a pasuk in the Torah. La kelev tashlicha noisai. I be mevatel it. The teretz is because although ein mevatel isel chatchila is an ised rabbanon, this is a taruvas yavish beyavish, and by a taruvas yavish beyavish over there ein mevatel isel chatchila l'chulei alma midayraisa. The truth is this yisoid from the Heilig Chassam Sofer Shteit Shain and Chuvas Noida Beyehuda. So this is shnei go'inei yoylam nischavnu l'davar echad. That as much as there's a shayla of ein mevatel isel chatchila, Issa Deiraisa, Issa the Rabbanon. And according to the Ruba of Rishonim, it's only Issa the Rabbanon. That's only true by a Taruvas Lach Balach, but it's not true when it comes to a Taruvas of Yavish Beyavish. But I was just thinking, Lulei de Mistafina, as it relates to the Iker Kasha of the Heilig Chassam Sofer. And that is, why does the Torah say, like Kelef Tashlichan Oisai, there's an Eitzah, make it into a Taruvas, Ein Mevatel Isel Chatchila is only an Issa the Rabbanon, and like this, you'll be able to eat it. And that is, I saw a shayla. The Torah says if you have a treifa, lo yisay chelo, last option, like kelev tashlichan oisay. Why do you have to give it to your dog? There's an eitzah. Why don't you give it to your children? I mean, don't try this at home, literally. But why don't you give it to your children? Why don't you take the treifa and give it to your children that are ketanim? A katan is not chayiv in mitzvahs. And being that a katan is not chayiv in mitzvahs, so Why can't you just give him the treifa? Why do you have to get rid of it? Like this, every day, my child goes to yeshiva, I'm going to make him a sandwich. This sandwich is going to be a treifa. He's not muzzer in Torah mitzvahs. So what should be the problem? So, I know it. You're going to say, right? Everyone's rolling their eyes now. Why? Because isn't there a lav in the Torah of lois sachilum, right? Let's just preface this a little bit better. Chinuch, that's not a mitzvah deraisa, right? Katan oichel nevelas, ein bezem mitzvah lafrisha. So what's the problem? Just give it to the katan. The teretz is, there's a lav of lois sachilim. What's the lav of lois sachilim? So that's a Gemara, Mesachtes Yivamas Daf Kuf Yudal Ramad Aleph. The Gemara says that you're not allowed to feed biyodayim a katan a davar aser. How do I know it? Because it says it in the Torah not once, not twice. It says it 3 times. It says it with regards to the Isser Shkatzim V'Ramasim. It says it with regards to the Isser Dam. And it says it in the beginning of Parshas Emor, V'Amarta, Lahazak G'daylam Alaktanim, regarding a katan, that's a kohen, is not allowed to be metamet to a mace. But the Gemara says that there's a lav in the Torah called Lois Achilum, and the lav of Lois Achilum teaches me that it's aser to go ahead and to feed a katan, something that's aser to a gadol. Okay, so if there's a lav of lois achilim, that's the eitzah. But it's not so pashit. You want to know why it's not so pashit? Because there's a huge shaila in the poskim whether the isra lois achilim, which is an Issa Deiraisa, is that true only for the 3 things that are mentioned in the Sugi of Yavamis, or is that true for all other Isurim as well? Meaning, the Gemara says it with regards to 3 Isurim. It says it by Shkotzim, it says it by Dam, and it says it with regards to Emavar Marta, by Tumas Kainim, Lahazak G'daylam Alaktanim. But what about Shari Isurim? What about Treifa? Is there going to be an Issa Lois Achilim or not? This is a major shayla. Now, to be fair, in the beginning of the Masechta, we spoke out from the Chuvas Neidah Yehuda. We made a huge deal about this. That the Neidah Yehuda said, with regards to the Grace Akasha, that why is it that a Cheresh Shait of Katan are allowed to shecht Chulin? Why don't we say that they're not a Bar Zvicha, they're not Chayv in mitzvahs? And if they're not Chayv in mitzvahs, so they should be like a guy, where Shchitas Soivikei Chavim is Nevela. And Maishno, when it comes to Tefillin and Mezuzahs, that a Katan that writes Sefer Tefillin Mezuzahs mean that he's not a Bar Shira, so he's not a Bar Ksiva, say the same thing, he shouldn't be able to shech. And the Yehuda said it's Grace Teres, and we said the Pri Megadim learned it up in the Shach and Siman Aleph, that the chiluk is that although it's true a Katan is not muzer by himself to not eat Nevelos Treifus, but at the same time, but the Yehuda was picking sides in that tshuva. Now the Yehuda was assuming that there's an Issa Deiraisa of Leisachilim not only by the 3 Yisurim that the Gemara mentions in Yevamos Kuf Yudalad, but it's true for all Yisurim. And according to that, it's not shver. You can never feed a katan, a treif, and you're being given this a deiraisa. But what about all the other poskim? Gedoyle, Pri Megadim, andere Gedoyle poskim, and it's Psichakalelas who hold not that way, who hold that Lois Achilum is only for the 3 lavin that the Gemara mentions in Yevamos Kuf Yudalad Raman Aleph. So the chayr is an eitzah. What's the eitzah? The eitzah is, instead of like Kelev Tashlichan, give it to your katan. We take for granted that a Yid would never do that. But at the end of the day, you should be able to do that. So if you should be able to do that, so why is that not an Eitzah? Why is that not an Eitzah? A Kelev Tashlichan Oisai, just go and give it to your katan. But the teretz is pashat. What's the teretz? The teretz is that we spoke so much already about this idea that when it comes to machalas asuros, there's 2 dinim. There's the Issa V'Heter component of the machalas asuros, and then there's also an idea based on a Gemara in Mesechtes Yuma Daf Lamed Tes that says that if a person eats machalas asuros v'nitmeisem bam al tikri v'nitmeisem ela v'nitamtam, and we learn from there that when a person eats machalas asuros, in addition to the Issa V'Heter, there's also a concept of Timtum Halev. There's also an element of Timtum Halev that is going to come about when a person goes ahead and a person eats Machalas Asuros. And we mentioned that the Gedolei Achronim say that's Pshat and Rabbeinu Tam. The Rabbeinu Tam says when the Gemara says Hashta Behemten Shel Tzadikim Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Meivit HaKol HaYodam Tzadikim Atzmo Lo Kolshkein, it's only B'Midah Da'achila. Why is Midah Da'achila different? Because when it comes to Machalas Asuros, there's an element of Timtum Halev. We said the Meshech Chochmah Parshat Vaschanon who spoke out that's why when the Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael and they were told that you're going to see bottom Maleim Kol Tov, I feel Kadli the Chaziri, the Gemara Chulin Daf Yitzayim and Ralph, you're allowed to eat whatever you want. But then right afterwards it says that be careful. Pentishkach v'ram levavcha v'shachachta. Why do we need an azara right afterwards? Because you're going to eat machalas asuros, even though it's mutter. I feel Kadli the Chaziri. But there's a metzias, there's a poison, a spiritual poison that's going to enter the guf of the person, and that
can be extremely harmful, and as a result, the Torah says if you're going to eat the kadli, the chassid gesundheit. But at the same time, just be careful. Realize what it is you're bringing into your guf. We shtal sudar sameach that says even though it says doichaloisa say, but it could be that when it comes to machalas asurus, you don't find anywhere that you're allowed machalas asurus. To answer the Yerushalmi's kasha, why it is that when the Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael that first year, right? How were they allowed to eat from the chadash? Why didn't you say asay doichaloisa? The Bali never asked the kasha because the Bali knew there's no asay doichaloisa. Say May Simcha made a cheshbon. It was only the Yerushalmi l'shitasai. We spoke about maybe that's why the Kan and the Veshet are called simonim. They're called simonim because that's the simon that you're a yid. When you're nizer and machalas asuris, you have kedushas Yisrael. You have the Avdallah ben Yisrael Amen. Right? That's where that whole Indian comes about. That Indian comes dafka through that thing. You know, it's interesting. Even this pasuk alone, if you notice, every time Kemat, the Torah talks about Machalas Asuras, the Torah prefaces it with the fact that Klal Yisrael are Kedoshim. Right? The pasuk that we spoke so much about in the beginning of the Masechta was in the end of Parshat Shmini. Al teshaktu es nafshei seichem b'chol hasheretz hasheretz v'lo yisetamu b'hem v'netmeisem bam ki ani Hashem Elokeichem v'hiskadishtem v'yisem kedoshim ki kodeshon v'lo yisetamu es nafshei seichem b'chol hasheretz al haaretz. Right? The Torah mentions the word kedusha 10 times. With regards to the nevela, the Torah says, "Lo yisoichlu kol nevel." Since in Parshas Re'eh, la ger Hashem b'sharecha titnena v'achala, oy mochel anachri, ki am kodesh atal Hashem Elokecha lo yisavashal gedi b'chalev imay. Here too, by the treifa va'anshe kodesh tionli ubasa b'asad the treifa lo yisachelu. Whenever the Torah talks about machalas asuris, the Torah is madgish this point that Klal Yisrael are kedosh, and all the Rishonim say it in their own nusach. Because we're kedoshim, that's why we were commanded. That's why we were nitztava to make sure that we're not going to eat things that we're not supposed to eat. But either way, it's mavur that when it comes to machalas asuros, there's 2 dinim. There's the issa v'heter, but there's also the inyan of timtum alev. It could be what the Torah is saying. Avada mitzad the isser treifa. Go ahead and give it to a cotton. Why not? Lo yisachilim. Go. We can clear the prima godim's chakira and the psicha koileles. Whether the lav of lo yisachilim is only true for the 3 azaras that's mentioned in the Furish and the Gemara Yavamas Kuf Yadalu, whether it's true for all these surim as well. But there's another element over here. The other element over here is that when a person eats machalas asuros, that is going to shter the kedusha of the yid. Kedushas Yisrael, the Havdalah ben Yisrael Amen, the simin as dosh shteit yid is totally, believe it or not, it's totally in machalas asuros, and that has nothing to do with whether there's an isser or there's no isser. Kadli the Chaziri Ramei Simcha said brought with it the timtum halev. If a tzaddik would eat unknowingly, it would bring with it timtum alev. I say, yeah, but it's still going to bring with it a certain element, a certain dimension of timtum alev. It's for that reason, zok the Torah, la kelev tashlichan oisa. We can give it to your child. The child doesn't have an isser. I understand the child doesn't have an isser, but you're going to give your child something that's going to be metamtim his life. The nafkamina between the gadol and the katan is only whether he has the isser or he doesn't have the isser. But at the end of the day, the timtum alev that the gadol would get, it's pashat the katan would get. And if you're not sure, just chaz over the Ramah, where the Ramah talks about a meinekes who, even if she's a chayla sheyesh by sakana, and she has to eat machalas asuras, but let someone else be meinek the child, because that little bit of machalas asuros is going to eventually make its way into the lave of that child, and it's going to be soisim, some of the mayonos that this child needs in order to be able to pick up with his spiritual antenna all the ruchnias that's being poured down to him from Shemayim. The idea of timtum alev affects the katan in the identical way that it affects the gadol, and that's why the Torah says like of tashlichan oisai. It's not because if you give it to the katan you're going to be over in this raisa. You're not. But at the same time, you're taking away his kedusha. So is that an eitzah? It doesn't make any sense. The kasha doesn't start. It's not a kasha. It has absolutely no havana. The emes is, I think in Taicha the pasuk we have a little bit of an oimek. The pasuk says, "Va'anshe kodesh tiyunli." Ubasa basada treifa loisaychelu la kelev tashlichan oisay. The Torah prefaces the Issa treifa with va'anshe kodesh tiyunli. Why? All the Rishonim say, because why can't I eat a treifa? Why mechtes I can't eat a treifa? Ubasa basada treifa loisaychelu. Why not? It's kosher. Why can't I eat it? The Torah is va'anshe kodesh tiyunli. Oh, but the emes is, it could be the va'anshe kodesh tiyunli is explaining the second part of the pasuk also. Why is it like kelev tashlichan oisay? Why can't I just go ahead and give it to my child? The Torah is va'anshe kodesh tiyunli. Va'anshe kodesh tiyunli, and that's why you can't eat it. And va'anshe kodesh tiyunli, that's why
you can't give it to your child. The emes is in the pasuk of Nevela, where the Torah mentions this idea. What does the pasuk say? Lo yisoichlu kol Nevela lager asher b'sharecha titnenu v'achala oy mocher lenachri ki am kodesh ato l'Hashem Elokecha. Here too, this is the pasuk that doesn't just say thou shalt not eat nevela. You shouldn't eat nevela, and what should you do with the nevela? Don't give it to your child. You want to know why? Ki am kodesh atal Hashem Elokecha. And the ki am kodesh atal Hashem Elokecha is a pirish on the ration of the pasuk. Lo yisoichlu kol nevela, and it's also a pirish on the sefer of the pasuk. In fact, by the treifa, it says Kodesh Tiyun Li next to Ubas Basad the Treifa Lo Yisachelu, and by Nevela it says it by the Sefer like Ger Hashem B'Sharecha Titnenu V'Achol Machal L'Noch Yam Kodesh Atal Hashem Elokecha Yagid Olav Reyoy, because this idea of Anshe Kodesh Tiyun Li Ki Am Kodesh Atal Hashem Elokecha, that's the explanation for why you can't eat it. It's also the explanation why there's no option. What do you mean? I could come up with a chap. I have an option. The option, let me give it to my child. I Lo Yisachilu, that's totally in the Prima Godim's Chakira. The teretz is that's all true from an Issa V'Heta perspective. But being that what's at stake is Kedushas Yisrael, V'anshe Kodesh Tiyun Li, Ki Am Kodesh Atal Hashem Elokecha, that's why it's not even an eitzah to give it to the child. That's why it has to be like Kelev Tashlichon Oisai. That's why it has to be like Ger Hashem B'Sharech Titnenu V'Achala Oimacher L'Nachri. The Chassam Sofer asked the kasha. The Chassam Sofer's kasha was that I have an eitzah. Why is it like Kelev Tashlichon Oisai? But the Chassam Sofer asked the kasha regarding Nevela as well. Why is it like Ger Hashem B'Sharech Titnenu V'Achala Oimacher L'Nachri? There's an eitzah. Take the Macholas Asurais, be mevatel it b'roiv. Ein mevatel nisa l'chatchila is only a nisa d'Rabbanan. Like this, you're not going to have a problem. What was the Chassam Sofer's teretz? Chassam Sofer was mechadish because of this. Oh, the only time ein mevatel nisa l'chatchila is a nisa d'Rabbanan, that's when there's a taruvas lach balach. But when there's a taruvas yavish b'yavish, then there's going to be a nisa d'Raisa. Lulei de mistafina. Maybe you can say, we spoke earlier in the week Pamayim Bahava, about the concept of chumras. Specifically, we spoke about this idea of what happens when you have something that's mutter me'ikar adin. The soilus lamincha, Rabbi Yaakov Reichner, who brought in the name of the Teres Ashan, the Tosfos Yontif, said that what if somebody wants to be machmer when it comes to klishei nienim of ashal, or somebody has a little bit of isser that was nesarev with shishim of heter, but he wants to be machmer in the sugya bittul b'roy. So is he allowed to? Is he not? He said he's not allowed to. It's derech. Isser heter says no, you could do it. He said that you're not allowed to do it. It's actually derech minas. But we spoke from the Chida that the Chida says in his Birkei Yosef, Yeridei Simen Yud Zayin, that that's only true that you're not allowed to be machmer if you're being mefakfik in the din. I don't trust the halacha bittul. Or you're saying that I don't want to rely on the fact that a klisheni is Einim Avash, all the other examples that we spoke about. In that instance, it's a shayla of minus, because now you're undermining the Messiah of Chazal. But if a person wants to be a kaddish atzmecha b'mutalach, and he says, I want to be a kedushim to you, I want to take upon myself a precious of kedusha, I don't want to have anything to do with machalas asuras. Even if it was batal b'shishim, I want to have nothing to do with that. Then adarabah, kadoshi amelai. It's all about the perspective. How am I going to it? Am I approaching it that I'm insecure about the heter? That's wrong. But if I'm a bal nefesh that wants to be merachik myself from a davar aser betachlas harichuk, well, that's something that I actually do have a right to do. And to the contrary, it's an element of kedusha. If a yid would go ahead and he would take iser and he would be mevatel beheter, it would be mutter mi ikar adin. Aber mitzad kedoshim to you, mitzad kadosh atzmecha b'mutalach. For that we have a chida. For that we know already that there's an idea that the kedoshim would stay away from it. And by the way, the issa v'heter for sure. That's the first opinion that's brought down in the Pischei Tshuva Yeridei Yisem Kuf Tezayin holds. Lechatchila, if a person has a shishim situation, it's a choshev ezach for a person to be machmer. We mentioned that the Andra that held it was minus, and we were trying to be miyashav that shita. But the shita of the issa v'heter was that it's lechatchila davar shal kedusha. But even the ones that hold minus, the Chida already said that it's only if you're going about it because you're being mefakfik in the din. But if you're doing it mitzad akdusha, then already it's going to be okay. If lafizeh could be, it's the same mahalach. The anshe kodesh tiyonli. The Indian of machalas nasuras. This is an Indian of kedusha. It's an Indian of kadesh atzmecha b'mutalach. And being that there's an element of kadesh atzmecha b'mutalach, therefore ubasa basada treifa loisay chelu lakelov tashlichan oisay. You're right. There would have been an eitzah. There would have been an eitzah to give it to a child.
there would have been an eitzah to be mevatel at b'shishim. And me'ikra din, maybe both eitzahs would work. Could be there's no lois achilum, and could be a mevatel isl chatchila. Afilu b'taruvas yavish v'yavish is only giving an issa derabbanan. Aber va'anshei kodesh tiyunli. We're dealing over here with inyanim of kedusha. We're dealing over here with inyanim of timtum alev. Mitzad the inyan of kedusha, mitzad the inyan of timtum alev. That's why we say la kelev tashlicha noisai. Don't give it to a katan. And mitzad the inyan of kedusha, which by the way, this is just the general inyan of kedusha, not even the timtum alev the inyan of kedusha. Mitzad the general idea of kedoshim tiyu, of kadosh atzmucha b'mutalach, for a person to distance himself as much as possible from machalos asuros. Well, it's for that reason, la kelev tashlicha noisai, la ger asher b'sharecha. That's why it could be, the Torah says, not only should you not eat the nevelis and the treifas, but don't even come up with chaps and eitzes of how to save it. It's all predicated on this idea of a anshe kodesh tiyunli.